Dalvin Cook declares his holdout plans, and we have the Dynasty game plan. Welcome to the Football Guys Dynasty Show. I'm your host, Chad Parsons. And with the News Fairy dropped some news on us this week, it feels, Jordan, like we have some actual NFL activity. We're going towards something. We have a disgruntled running back. Things are feeling normal again. The past two off seasons, we've had Le'Veon Bell. We've also had Melvin Gordon last year, where these holdouts turned into prolonged ones. So maybe we get Alvin Kamara, maybe we get Joe Mixon. But to me, this is shaping up to be one of the storylines. Dalvin Cook, big time offense, and we have Alexander Mattison right there waiting in the wings, where Dalvin Cook, you don't want to play for your prescribed amount to close out your rookie contract. Alexander Mattison, I'm sure, will pick up the pieces. So Jordan, this is definitely one that we have to monitor. We have to have a game plan for, and we're going to discuss that to open the show.
In a year of chaos, at least we get back to some normalcy with running backs disgruntled about their paychecks. So, I mean, that's at least something feels right come this time of year. I mean, I don't know about you, Chad. In terms of dynasty ownership, there's no one I own more than Alexander Mattison. And, you know, this has been a bet that was placed. And this is, I think, the strategic part of dynasty, right? And take this forward too. This isn't just an Alexander Mattison, Dalvin Cook conversation. This is AJ Dillon, Aaron Jones. This is going back years, James Conner, Le'Veon Bell, right? I mean, these bets that we have made on these types of players in the past, they have, this is the upside that you get, right? This is the chance that you get. Mattison, I think I own him in 75% of leagues. I'm not sure sort of where you are on that scale. I know he was the highest that we owned last year. But the 3-down roll in a offense that runs really heavy, I think my first Footballguys article I wrote at Footballguys earlier this offseason was on the handcuff running backs to own. And the number one player, Alexander Mattison. So feeling good about that, feeling good about the bet. And listen, even if I think one thing that I would caution people about is Alexander Mattison just doesn't need to pan out in terms of being a starter week one or Dalvin Cook holding out, right? If Dalvin Cook injury, if Dalvin Cook walks in free agency, if a holdout, right? If a suspension, not that we think that's coming, but all of these things, all of those opportunities present massive upside for Alexander Mattison. And, a stat that we discuss and we've discussed before, WARP, wins over replacement player. You look at what James Conner did that year where Le'Veon Bell held out. And I think Conner it was the first, 9-10 weeks of his season. Then he got hurt, but that was a 1.5 wins over replacement play. And so you won a game and a half more than you would have thought coming into the season, or, if assuming you were just starting a replacement level player, that's the amount of impact that they have. And that's as a profile, as a system, right? These backup running backs, especially guys that have day two pedigree that are on rookie deals, they have a really, really good opportunity to pay off and a really high impact. So I think that's really the news out of this is don't sell Alexander Mattison short right now. I think you'll probably touch on that, but I've seen some offers where people are trying to lowball this. I mean, if you paid a second for him, which is what we did a year ago, do not cash that out right now, right? It is you need a lot more than that to sell him right now.
Yeah, it seems like we're getting on almost an annual kick, Jordan, of finding that running back that goes day two, that has the profile we're looking for, but yet goes to a situation where they're blocked. James Conner qualifies. Alexander Mattison qualifies. This year, AJ Dillon qualifies, even though he's going for a little more than the other two in terms of their cost. But you get that running back that goes to the quote unquote blocked landing spot. And what happens is somehow within 24 months or so, things become unblocked and you're not really sure how it will occur. But you mentioned how you have multiple avenues to get there, whether it's off-field issues, injury, contract, etc. And we're seeing some of that play out. Dalvin Cook was relatively healthy last year, high impact, but we're seeing how that can translate to the next man up being a good proxy for that. Someone who can have 75, 80, 85, 90% of that production of the untouchable or high impact player. Well, all of a sudden they become replaceable. And he's asking for, again, not Christian McCaffrey money, but basically next tier down. And that's a tall ask. The Vikings have some salary cap issues. Of course, there's ways around that. But from the fantasy front, things like you said that we're going to talk about a lot as we get closer to the season, and certainly in season, is things like wins over replacement player, where a high-end running back can easily be a 2-win over replacement during a fantasy regular season. And getting that from the second round of your rookie draft, getting that from your dynasty bench is something that really changes the landscape of saying, okay, I made the playoffs, but now I'm the number 1 seed, or I didn't make the playoffs and now I'm in the playoffs. It can, a couple wins over the course of 12, 13 weeks, especially when depth is going to be important this year, bye weeks, injuries, and getting a guy that was your running back 5, 6, 7, that's now your running back 1 or 2 or 3, where now you're bludgeoning people with your flex. Those are the big impacts. And really, looking around, Jordan, and the more I look at this, I mean, there really are 5 to 10 players in a fantasy season in aggregate, in the macro view, that are really making a big difference. And yes, depth is important. Yes, having that really quality top 5 to 10 players on your dynasty roster, but really that are coming from a low cost to a high impact. There's not that many names. And it's like, if you don't have one of those, you better have some good luck with lack of injuries on your team, really have an all-star team, and it all came together in the weeks that you needed them, especially at the end of the year. Otherwise, you better have that influx from the waiver wire or from your bench and one of those short subset players. And I look back, Mattison was my highest drafted player out of rookie drafts last year. And another one of the things that you mentioned with AWARP, adjusted wins over replacement, a moniker we're going to use on the show, is that one I like to use. We talk about exposure, which is if you really like a player, well, how much do you have? And what I would say is if you have 12 leagues, for an easy example, if you have 1 share, that's 1x. 1x means you should be market neutral on the player, because you got the exact number of shares an average owner would have. So I like to look at it, if you like a player, 2x, 3x, if you really like a player, 4x, 5x, and beyond. I was 6.5x on Alexander Mattison. So yes, I am a fan of I'm team Mattison. And again, Dalvin Cook has been someone pretty much annually. Last year was the healthiest he's been in quite a while in his football lifetime. Do we really want to roll the dice again? Is this going to be the year where he goes back to back? So even if he comes back, I would have, betting on regression almost, or betting on historics. Now, a player's injury prone until they're not, so maybe he strings it together. But that's just another avenue that I think may be underreported or underanalyzed in this whole thing, is that we're not talking about a perpetually durable, 3-4 year run like we saw with Marshawn Lynch of not missing a game. That is not the profile built up by Dalvin Cook. And again, and I'm actually even higher. I'm 7x this year on AJ Dillon. So we're getting up there in the stratosphere of, again, putting our money where our mouth is in terms of the bets and the player ownership rates that we are getting about the players that we back, like a Connor, like a Mattison, like a Dillon.
Yeah, and it's funny, you're higher on Dillon this year. I found it easier to get to where Mattison was last year.
Just because late second is always a great spot for these guys.
Right, because you can go down or you can go up in terms of getting to that spot. It was a really easy spot to get to for just a ton of ownership of him. And, I think in terms of people that actually took him ahead of me, it was almost universally people that I knew listened to our podcasts, right? I mean, it was people that got ahead of me on him were people that I knew, were our followers. So let me ask you this in terms of strategic. So we've hit Mattison, we've hit Dalvin Cook a little bit in terms of, and you talked about AJ Dillon. I'm high ownership on him. I think him and Jonathan Taylor are pretty much neck and neck in terms of ownership for me. What do you, how much is too much, right? Sort of what's your thoughts on the risk and diversifying on a player? What's your general thoughts on that? I don't think it's something that we've hit on recently, you and I talking. Just wondering what your thoughts are on diversifying.
Yeah, well, I know, to steal one of your terms, high variance. Embrace the variance. And the variance is, let's face it, you kind of want to win dynasty leagues and be the best dynasty owner. And how do you do that? Well, you don't do that by drafting by ADP and having equal exposure of a number, playing the market basically, and having a wide, this is not one of those mutual funds where you have 12,000 companies. You're like, oh, we got a little bit of everything. Well, that's not, dynasty shouldn't work that way. And man, if you like a lot of players equally, and it's almost like you just draft by the NFL draft position, you don't really have, favorites here or there. Well, if I'm at 7, I'm going to take the 7 player. And if I'm at 9, I'll take the 9 player of ADP. Like, that's not really how I've ever approached dynasty. If you have your favorites, you kind of want a lot. And it's not, no matter what, I'll say this for folks, that no matter what, even if you want, I think you jokingly said, and Mattison, I think, was the player last year. You're like, and this was in April or something, you said, I'm going to get 100% ownership. You're like, or I'm going to get as close to I've ever been on a player of having universal ownership. But it really is logistically impossible if you're in a decent amount of leagues. Now, if you're in 3 leagues, I think it is possible to have 100% ownership because of sample size. But I do think, again, the players you believe in, especially the cheaper the cost, 2nd round, especially 3rd round, 4th round, waiver wire. I mean, the cheaper you go, the easier it is. I mean, if you do waivers and there's a player, deep down, all of a sudden now, they're maybe interesting, but not like, oh, now I can suddenly put them in my lineup. You can probably pick them up at, if they're similar depths on basically every league that week. It becomes very formulaic when you put in those waiver claims. So again, but yet Jonathan Taylor, you can love the guy, but it's going to cost 101, 102, 103. I mean, you just may not be able to get there in every league. And it's just a logistical issue. But I personally like having, you're going to have, a smattering of 50, 60, 70 players across your dynasty leagues that you have one share. And that's fine. I mean, there's going to be circumstances, orphans, or a specific spot in a rookie draft or startup draft or a trade or something that you got a player thrown in for cheap. But in general, I think that base work and what's going to define your seasons is those players that are 2, 3, 4x in terms of your rate of ownership to the average, and that's really going to be your guys, your Mount Rushmore, your soapbox players. And I think that's really important to have. Again, it gives you a rooting interest. Why we like dynasty, why we like fantasy football is you're watching the games and you also have an invested interest in your team, your franchise, in addition to the NFL franchises on there. So I don't think that there is, quote unquote, too much of a player. I would certainly be happy, the players I like, if you said you can have them on every team as your building blocks. And yes, that increases variance. Yes, 2, 3 injuries can certainly affect your profit loss or your results for a given year. But again, you believe in the player, you believe at their current market value or what you paid when you got them. And I think it's just like stocks. I mean, you wouldn't be expected to own every stock out there or have some exposure to every stock out there because you obviously have your favorites.
Yeah, and you're shooting for along that embrace the variance line, right? I think that's different than a stock analogy too, and we've seen some discussion about this in the fantasy community recently. But I think the concept of playing safe or you want to diversify. I'm not building a retirement fund, right? Like I'm not trying to just shoot to be above average or just ride the sort of average return and in 30 years I'll retire. I'm trying to be 1 out of 12, right? Or 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 14 or 16, whatever. I'm trying to be the top team, and I call that top 8% outcome. The top finisher in a 12-team league, that's the top 8% outcome. You have to think like that and embrace that.
I love the polls, by the way, that you put on Twitter about what chances do you think of you have of winning your fantasy. Like you need to do this
30, 40%, right?
Yeah. It's like no one ever answers 8.5. Like I don't know if that's a choice that you put on there, but they never answer 8.5%. Like so many people are above 20%. You're like, that's 3x. Like that's the most dominant dynasty team this world, this universe has ever seen. And yet there's so many people that answer those polls that think that.
Yeah. It's but I think and
also the payouts, right? The payouts are so slanted where what I've looked at is, I mean, you really just need to win win a few, like if you're in, so if you're in 10 leagues, you don't have to, like, sometimes you think to have a good year, you got to win 5 of your 10 leagues. I mean, yeah, maybe in the perfect storm, you can do that. But even winning, 2 or 3 in the right ones, and having that, man, I was the top points, I was the number 1 seed, and I won the league. Like, that is a massive, that could be 6-7x, depending on the payout structure. So that is really important to know. Because yes, we're having a great time and we enjoy it. It fuels our flame for the sport we love. But it also is nice to turn that nice Christmas and New Year's bonus, at the end of the year. So
totally agree with that. And I think you need to embrace risk with that. You need to embrace variance and having these guys. And if Mattison turns into a nothing, right, he's not decisive to my dynasty team. That just means 1 out of whatever 20, 25, 30 guys is a backup running back this year. But
he's a late second round rookie pick, and you know what? He has the possibility to play like a high first round rookie pick.
Absolutely.
So you have that chance. Yeah, and what I would say is also this is Chad Parsons, Jordan McNamara, episode 7 of the Football Guys Dynasty Show, that this is the type of player that you say June 9th, as we record this, is not the day to get antsy with that Alexander Mattison share and be like, oh, I got to cash out. I paid $210, and guess what? I can get a 21 first and a marginal flip player for man. I'm winning. I'm turning that player into a profit. But you're leaving a lot on the table is what I would say. And nothing is really do you really think Dalvin Cook is going to cave? And in the next 4 to 6 weeks, he's going to be, everything's good. I love the Vikings and I love my new 4-year, $52 million contract. I would say that's unlikely. So even if you are trying to time the market, I think the market's only going to get hotter for Mattison over the next 4 to 6 or 8 weeks, as opposed to, boy, I really missed that opportunity back in June when this news first came out, and I could have, seen a profit of 15-20% or something from what I paid.
Yeah, I don't think the story's going away, right? This is something that we're going to deal with, and I think we're going to deal with it probably with multiple players. I mean, Dalvin Cook was the big one because he hit the news this week, but there's the possibility about Joe Mixon, right? There's a possibility of Kamara, right? There's a possibility of that class holding out for deals and the impact that makes. And that's really interesting on a Gio Bernard level, on a, to a lesser degree, I would say Travion Williams or Rodney Anderson, but Latavius Murray is the same height of impact that Alexander Mattison can make, Latavius Murray can make and did make last year. I mean, just even if Dalvin Cook shows up, signs a long-term deal, and Alexander Madison's a backup for his rookie contract, even assuming that's true, we have seen in recent years the impact that a running back like him can make in a really short sample size. So last year, my favorite stat in this is last year, I think it was week 7 and 8, whatever it was, that there was a 2-week stretch. I think it was week 7 and 8 or 8 and 9 that Kamara missed with an injury, and Latavius Murray started those 2 games. In that stretch, he was the running back 1. In a 2-week stretch, he was the running back 1, and returned 0.55. So over a half a win over replacement for the entire 13-week regular season. He returned that in 2 weeks. So that's a 3 warp. That is a better pace than McCaffrey was on last year, right? In terms of pacing. Now it's, again, short sample size, but in that time, probably just because of Latavius Murray, we're at least 1-1, if not 2-0, where you owned him and started him, right? That's the level of impact, even if Dalvin Cook comes back, that you can get out of Mattison or Dillon or all of these, this sphere of player that we're discussing.
That's a season changer, because again, What if you were at that moment about 500? I mean, you go 2-0 in a stretch and you beat the right team. All of a sudden, you're looking like you are going to make the playoffs. I mean, that may dictate trades that you are not making at that point of time of the season, and that's really why you can never really be too strong at running back. I mean, I think that's another thing another theme you're gonna hear cropping up. That part of it's a game of keep away. Part of it is I can now, depending on your lineups, if you can start, there's a league I'm thinking of that's half PPR I'm in, that you can start up to 4 running backs. And if you're starting 4 top 12, top 14 guys, whether it's 2 or 3 core guys that you expect to be there, and maybe one, I had Austin Eckler kind of join that group last year. But if you can all of a sudden fill your flex spots with solid NFL starting running backs, that's really a game changer for you that makes you tough to beat, because they're guys that can really benefit from short range touchdowns. They're not as quarterback dependent on level of play or matchup for that given week. There's a lot of intrinsic value. You mentioned Latavius Murray. I mean, showing up, being a quality option for a team that's already kind of zooming along, and you can be the number 1 overall running back over a span of time. Even if the guy, if memory serves, Kamara was hot to begin last season, but he wasn't the number 1 overall running back the moment he went out. So he actually outkicked his coverage in terms of the guy he was replacing, because he got the perfect storm of usage those weeks. So again, these running backs, and that's really why can you find, and actually a name that I know we've talked about and you've mentioned to me, where it's like, don't be too quick to sell this guy and just run him out of town, is Damian Williams. And it's probably along the lines of the same argument where you say, the assumptive is Clyde Edwards-Helaire comes in, has the job, runs with it, and Damian Williams is go sit over there. When in reality, Damian Williams could be the week 1 starter. In reality, there could be a lot of transitionary growing pains for the rookie that don't make it clear. And then guess what? What if it is a committee? What if Edwards-Helaire is the starter, but then gets hurt? It's back to Damian Williams. And he's another one where you say strong offense. If there is a clear-cut starter, that could be a top 5 runner and a 2+ warp guy on a per season pro rata basis. So that's what we're talking about in terms of how big of a deal it is to get the right running backs that can produce this high of an impact.
And you hit the perfect person. I mean, how many championship game checks did he write for people in Dynasty? And you go back, it was that 2016 Tim Hightower, right? I mean, no one rostered him in week 14. And by the time week 16 was over, he was on a lot of he was
writing
signing
checks.
A lot of checks.
He was writing Christmas checks.
there was a lot of happy children that were getting Christmas gifts because their dads or moms won fantasy championships, right? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, those things and Mostert, right? You see these stories, and building a strategy around them makes a lot of sense because it's common, right? And sometimes it's tough to pick the player, but if you sort of build to say, hey, I know that this story is possible, sort of how do I amplify my chances, right? That James Conner impact early, or that Mostert or Damian Williams impact late, just keep doing that and striving for that. And those have a huge upside in terms of what your team is. And I think what you said is hitting the nail on the head with Damian Williams. I mean, his stock has dropped, but you could argue that if there's a player that's going to see the clearest RB1 usage this year, it would be him, right? Because that would be Clyde Edwards-Helaire goes down and he takes over and is the lead. But I'm not saying that's the most likely outcome, but I think in terms of players that could take over a backfield as a backup or a committee type right now, he is one. And again, that high impact in that offense. I mean, all of these guys, and we hit this on the head, and this is dominating the first half of the show with our favorite topic, which is running backs. But this is the things that really get the juices flowing, because these are the things that make a huge impact.
And there's not 10 of them in the NFL. That's the thing. Like the more you do this, the more you analyze backfields and player profiles and offenses in this way, you start to get senses, as you go through seasons and get more and more data points about the type of player that kind of fits this mold, and why you get to the end of the year and it's like you don't just try to dump Damian Williams the moment they draft Edwards-Helaire, or you don't try to, again, flip Alexander Mattison during last regular season when you paid $210 and all of a sudden, someone wants to offer you a future second plus a player that doesn't move the needle all that much. That's when you learn not to jump at a deal like that to try to make, pennies of profit on a quarter, as opposed to, well, no, I'm shooting for a $5 bill. That's what you're kind of going towards. Do want to mention about the Football Guys daily email update. Joe Bryant puts together all the news every single day. It actually comes out midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. So no matter when you get up, I don't care how early your shift starts, you will have this in your inbox when you get up. And again, it is a driving force for making sure you don't miss something. You're bound to miss something. There's so many news and nuggets from around the NFL landscape, and especially this time of year, it's going to only heat up. So you need to sign up for that over at footballguys.com/free. And want to mention, this is actually the first time we are mentioning it, that Jordan and I are going to be doing an FFPC Dynasty Startup Draft together. It actually begins this week. Fingers crossed. I think we're on pace to start this week, Jordan.
Thursday. I think Thursday at 10.
Thursday, we're going to hit it. So we're going to be able to discuss it starting next week, some of the things that have occurred in our draft. And they're providing a promo through Football Guys. You're going to get a free $35 team when you register over there at myffpc.com/footballguys. So again, you're going to get some of the tools and tricks that we are going through this format and this strategy. It's a pretty unique one in FFPC, little shorter rosters. They have a super flex component if you want it. They also have tight end premium across the board for their scoring. So we're going to be able to break that down. And then later on, if you so choose, you're going to be able to go in there and try out a startup draft on your own or add to your own portfolio there with the Football Guys Players Championship. And Jordan, let's talk. I had one more, if I could. One more coffee story. This is the last one for a long time because I don't drink coffee. But Jordan, I thought you would really enjoy this one as a fellow fantasy football analyst and one that dives into the dark waters of late night efficiency, let's say. So part of my routine in season is staying up very late on Sunday nights. I watch all the games, and when we were traveling around, for folks that didn't know, we moved back from California to Florida, and part of that was going to be, hey, let's travel around the country. Let's get rid of all of our stuff, put it in the old Vanagon, and start traveling around for about 6 months. So during the NFL
you ended up
season,
in Nova Scotia at one point.
I know, yeah, we were all over the place. They're like, I need my passport. That we ended up on a barge that we needed. So I can't remember the city, but I want to say it was the Eastern time zone because it was crazy late, but we were very rarely did we travel on a Sunday or Monday because of the NFL schedule and because of my own schedule. But here's how it worked out. So, 2 people, 1 hotel room, Chad staying up till 3-4 in the morning. And then we actually had to go somewhere at like 7 in the morning. So this was not ideal. It was a Jordan typical schedule on probably a couple times a week, but not a typical Chad schedule. Chad sleeps till 11 or noon after doing that work schedule. And so I actually worked out I actually did all my work in the business center. Kind of creepy, fluorescent lighting. There's always kind of some strange sounds in the entrance area. But I was like, how am I going to make this work? I'm not going to finish till like 3:34 in the morning, and I've only got 2-3 hours. And I don't know, for people that I am worse. If you tell me sleep for 2 hours, I'm going to be an absolute train wreck. So I said, I don't know if I can. I'm going to need coffee. They actually have. We learned at the hotels they have kind of the same coffees at all hotels. Like you got the vanilla edition coffee made and all these things. But so I had this plan. I actually remembered this, Jordan, from like some coffee hack where it said if you drink coffee and then take like a 30 to 40 minute nap at most, or maybe 20 something minutes, that you wake up like alive and just you're buzzing, because that's about the amount of time it takes for the caffeine to really kick in. So I had, I think, at least 1 cup of coffee, and I went and I actually slept in the gym because I didn't want to disturb the missus. And because again, if I go in there, it's just
husband of the year right here. So
I stayed downstairs with all my gear, but I went and I took a nap on one of those, like, you see it and do, you do the curls or the fly or things like that. I slept with I just basically like laid down, took the coffee, laid down for about a half hour, and then proceeded. I was buzzing, Jordan. I was like, it was the best morning ever. Now, I will say by like 1 o'clock, I was like death, and literally you'd have to scrape me off of the bed. I don't even know what my schedule was the rest of the day, but I made it through. I was loading that car like I was a busy bee. I mean, it was, I will say I save it. My tolerance is so low, but when I really need it and I call upon it, coffee delivers.
You got to inject it right in your veins.
Right,
so that's kind of what I need to get the jolt. But yeah, no, I would
get it with your seventh cup a day. That seventh cup that day. That's really what does it for you. What do you? But how can I ask you, as someone that is a true certified, like so regular, like does it really degrade over time? Like how much it affects you from 5 minutes ago to 5 minutes after?
I don't feel it immediately. What I feel is like the sustained, like if like last night I had
A
it.
marathon runner.
Yeah. Last night I felt it kind of like I had a coffee kind of late, and I could have worked kind of like you said, like for a long time. And so I was up and cranking away just because it was just felt like I was zooming along. But yeah, I mean that's more when I feel it. I don't. Like if I go and drink a cup of coffee, I won't feel it instantly. I'll end up feeling it a couple of hours later, which is always dangerous because you get the coffee and then
like, I need more.
I need,
it's not working. So you get I need more.
2, and then it's like, eesh. And so I did interesting story. I haven't been to Starbucks since, I don't know, call it like March 16th, something like that.
They miss you, Jordan.
I went today. I happened to walk by it. It was open. I didn't realize it. And so I put in my mobile order, went in socially distanced. It was empty in there. I went in, got my coffee, said hello to everyone, and walked out.
Did you miss it?
I tasted really good. Like,
did you pick it? Did you pick it? And you were like, "Hello, old friend."
We had a moment. It was a moment.
Yeah. Did you just look at it and it was like that music playing on one of those commercials?
I gave it a little hug.
It's you hug. I've been looking for. God, that'd be so good. Jordan kissing the rim.
Yeah.
Right on there. Okay. Let's talk some dynasty trades. Because again, rubber meets the road. We talked some Alexander Mattison, some Dalvin Cook here, and FFPC. So right in our neck of the woods, going to be thinking some strategy here over the next couple days, getting ready for our draft. As I mentioned, we've got Darren Waller traded for in a fourth next year. And for folks that don't know an FFPC, that's an aggregate because you make sharp cut downs. There's actually some good veterans typically in those drafts, as well as the full rookie crop annually in that 7 round. I believe it's 7 round annual draft. Darren Waller in a fourth for TJ Hockenson and a second. So Darren Waller is that obviously more productive player from last year. Hockenson having the pedigree going forward after his rookie season.
Yeah, this isn't for me. I mean, I really like Hockenson in terms of going forward. That top 10 tight end. That's just a really good profile. I would take the Hockenson side on this, and I would say I like the play. I probably like Hockenson a little bit more than Waller, and I especially like the. I think Waller was a lot of circumstance last year. Basically that things just got funneled to him. Sometimes it's really tough to replicate that. I thought we saw flashes of TJ Hockenson last year, some good, some bad, but by and large, you're not expecting a ton out of tight ends. But I did see the positives, right? I think it was a mixed bag, but there was plenty of positives to take from it. So I'd take the Hockenson side on this one and feel pretty comfortable about it.
Yeah, me too. I think the top 10 season, he basically had one big game, but this is more for me about selling Waller than it is buying Hockenson in particular. If I were to narrow down one of the sides and one of the angles, just because Waller feels like that perfect storm of like what was going on in that offense. I mean, think back. I mean, it was Tyrell Williams was again doing his thing. He got the big contract, relatively big contract, but again, he's been an ancillary guy pretty much by profile his whole career. So Waller was basically the engine. I think he had over 25 targets more than anybody else in that offense, where you think that's going to change drastically this year unless myriad of injuries or complete poor play and not transitioning well by any of the rookies. We'll see if Hunter Renfrow takes a step forward. Jason Witten is actually on that team. He's probably going to take a few targets, even if it's not many. So there's just so many things I think working against Waller having another season. He was a wide receiver prospect. So to say he came out of the ether late in the game is an understatement there in terms of his profile and what he was able to do as a complete outlier season. Here's another one. So this is a keeper league. So again, it's adjusted dynasty. It's kind of blending redraft into dynasty. It's a 10-player keeper league, 12-team PPR. Leonard Fournette He was traded for this year's 108 and 209. And Fournette, a lot of people not fans, a lot of people saying that, he's going to be left out in the cold. He's dealing with volume right now. Jacksonville is probably going to be moving on in short order. But 108, again, in a short keeper league, is one that maybe isn't guaranteed, depending on the team, to make your keeper list the following year. So it is a very tight roster annually in that format.
It's wild to me that Leonard Fournette goes out and basically answers a couple of the biggest questions that we had about him, essentially, which was, can he be involved in the passing game? And from a volume perspective, answered that one very well. Can he stay healthy? Answered that one really well. Can he keep his head on straight? Answered it pretty well. Post the running back 7 finish. And his price somehow goes down. I mean, he's going later in drafts this year than he was last year. And is that age? Is it contract related? I'm not sure. I'm going to just keep buying. So at this cost, again, a lot of what you said about I think the format's important in this too. If this was super flex and Dynasty, is Cam Akers available at 107? At 108? That might be a little bit different. If it's in start 1, I think there's a virtually very limited possibility that happens. So now you're looking in the wide receiver range, which again, they take time to develop. Is that going to fit a long-term keeper? I mean, lock and load Fournette for this year, especially in more of what I would consider a more immediate type build in a more limited keeper league. I'm pretty bullish on Fournette. So yeah, give me Fournette.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I obviously a number 1 overall running back finish would be the answer to this question, but outside of 3 straight years, 3 straight top 12 point per game seasons in PPR, which I don't know if a lot of people were expecting that. And he really hasn't had big time touchdown luck or success so far. Imagine if that is added at some point or in 2020, what the upside could be. So, and just not a lot of competition. Again, there shouldn't be a lot of competition for a top 5 pick. So I don't know what else people want other than, I mean, he is highly likely to produce another running back 1 season in his career. So, and he's going to be inside of your 10 keeper line. So yeah, I think he's one of those short lists, to be a potential 2 wins over replacement guy, this year. So that's a lot of value. I love rookie picks, but I think you got to go Fournette there and be happy about it. And it sounds like, I mean, myself included, that your analytical brain it's kind of tough to wrap around how Fournette has not gained almost any stature in the dynasty marketplace with his player value, even though he put a lot of things to rest last year specifically, and he's off to a great career start.
2 top 10 seasonal finishes by the age of 24 years old, and he's being disrespected.
Yep.
I mean, that says it all.
We got to pick somebody. Somebody has to be drastically underrated with their profile so far. I mean, everyone can't be properly valued. Otherwise, it wouldn't be any fun. All right, last one. And this is a draft that just occurred. So this is a startup draft in 2020. Deep lineups overall, and it is a start 1 quarterback format. Some big names being passed around. That always means high leverage, and there's a potential to really win or lose the trade if you have, as they say in Indiana Jones, chosen poorly. Michael Thomas and a 2021 first for Saquon Barkley, a second in a couple years, and a second in 3 years. So it's basically Michael Thomas and a first for Barkley and some seconds. But these are first round startup picks being transposed on these various rosters. Where do you stand on this for a team that was just constructed out of the startup draft?
Correct me if I'm wrong. This could essentially be 101 or 102 for 103 and a first next year, right? I mean, that's you could make an argument that Michael Thomas goes that high,
leading the witness.
Yeah. I mean, from a developmental, from a long-term building perspective, in terms of roster construction, I mean, if I were to take, I mean, you and I have 101. If we got 103 plus a future first, I mean, would we love Barkley? Yeah, but getting that elite wide receiver locked in, which does a lot for roster construction, a lot for later on. Plus, you're getting that future asset. That's pretty interesting early on. That's pretty compelling to me. I'd be interested in your thoughts, but that's a pretty compelling trade to make considering the profiles that you're getting.
Yeah, I'd like it more on the superflex side. If that 21 first was in a superflex format.
Sure.
And again, and one thing that I think is worth mentioning here, which is, and I know one thing that when we talk future picks, one thing that you always mention is, that's another high variance way of accumulating value is you get those future first, even if it's a strong team. Hey, they're going to be in the title game. Oh, they're really good. Well, that could end up being 106. I mean, They get a couple injuries, that could be 103, and yet they valued it in a trade like 112 or maybe even lower. So yeah, those future picks, which are very ambiguous coming out of a startup draft, because I always say year one out of a startup draft is the toughest one to win because you just don't have a good lay of the land. Who are the strong teams? Who are the weak teams? I mean, some people are going to go into a rebuild almost as soon as that first year starts that didn't even know it. They're going to start out 0-4, and all of a sudden they're like, I thought I was going to win. And now they might take a step back with some of the trades they make and be, not contending for 2 years. I mean, some years you may only have 8 or 9 teams that actually have much of a chance to win that year. So all of a sudden your chances as one of those teams gets better. And obviously you're improving your chances for a high pick if you're one of the other teams. But again, right now that 2021 first is pretty ambiguous because you're just out of the startup draft. Now I personally, and as you were saying that and hearkening to our upcoming draft, I was like, I would go Barkley all day just because I think he's such a cornerstone player. And that first to me isn't really moving the needle enough. I do get what you're saying of like, it's 101 or 102 for only moving down a few spots, but you are tier jumping. So you are,
that's true.
I mean, I almost think of it as, I don't care if I'm moving to 3 or if I'm moving to 10, you're kind of getting a very similar wide receiver. Now, what I would say is moving to 10, if it's not Michael Thomas, it's Davante Adams, you probably get more than this. I mean, I don't know if that's just eliminating the picks you're giving. Plus, maybe you can get a couple first. Maybe you can get another top 50 or 60 player. But I know you can get a lot of people have Michael Thomas and say Davante Adams or insert other wide receiver relatively close. And Barkley, compared to some of the other running backs, when you drop down at all, it's a pretty steep drop in terms of now. So to me, that's a lot of leverage to lose. And I honestly, first of all, I'm kind of surprised they had to throw in the seconds. To me, that's a little like, you're just kind of banging people in the shins, with a little stick. You're just like, oh, okay, I'll do the deal. But how about these seconds in 3 years? Like, I'm all about getting future picks. But to me, that's a little excessive where it's like, you're trading for Saquon Barkley. You didn't do it in the startup draft. You weren't able to get that done maybe, but you got it done shortly after the draft in the same offseason. So how about you just consider that a win? You probably wanted him then, you didn't get him. Now you got him. So just kind of be happy with that, but good on him for negotiating those future picks. But yeah, to me, Barkley is again, a guy that you look at, he's coming up on 23 years old. I feel like he's Christian McCaffrey or better, but a year earlier in his curve. Like I wouldn't be surprised if Barkley is the number 1 running back scorer this year or next year. Like it feels like it's coming. He's such an overt talent and arguably the most talented running back, especially if you go by NFL draft position in the entire NFL. So I just think that is going to be hard to replicate. Thomas is a monster. But I feel like, in one thing we'll probably discuss next week a little bit, is just a wide receiver. It feels like this is a year you can almost in dynasty startups go deeper and say, I'm kind of okay not going and not technically getting a wide receiver in the first 2-3 rounds and still feeling pretty good about that. And previous years, you felt a lot more squeamish if you missed out.
I think you and I are going to have some strategy conversations about this before we draft, but I'm wondering, is that age? Or is it? I think it's to me, it's a combination of a couple of things, right? The Davante Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, they're a little bit older than you would historically see there.
27x, yeah, and the thing I always talk about, and here we go, overtime. We'll start declaring it. We're a little in overtime right now. We're waiting. Next score wins in the hockey analogy. Yeah, I feel like they're old enough. Are they old? No, but you kind of want to project out. I mean, especially with your first round pick, right? Or maybe your first 2 or 3 picks. You don't really want a guy where you say, in 2 to 3 seasons, I'm going to have minimal flexibility in terms of there's going to be enough decline if they're still producing. I'm not going to want to trade them. That liquidity factor, I don't think you're really going to have, and they're going to kind of be past that historical prime window of production, I like to say, in terms of you're not really expecting their peak season by that point. And if you accelerate 2 to 3 years with Barkley, he's going to be 26, 27 and potentially, on an all-timer type track. Whereas a 30-year-old wide receiver, we know that marketplace definitely shifts in terms of what fluidity you have. All right, so that's going to do it this week. And a reminder about the Football Guys daily email update. You want to sign up for that at footballguys.com/free. Also want to call out Jordan, your Dynasty Startups Draft Strategy article, which was last month over at Football Guys. Check that out. There's a Dynasty section of the article tab there at the homepage. So you kind of go into a lot of the general strategies when you're going into a Dynasty startup draft. Is there any one thing you want to call out for people to check out and go over to Football Guys to read?
Well, you can check that out, but I do think the running back article, and you have the other thing too, which is the matrix, right? The
positional matrix. Yeah. So the first two are out. I think by the time you hear this show, the wide receiver one will be out, but all 4 skill positions where it kind of goes over and puts them into buckets. And it was well timed with Dalvin Cook news and Alexander Mattison being in a high upside, backup with high potential category. But you can kind of just see that. And as well as, some of the posts that you've had, one was about winning running backs, for your team, right? In terms of the high upside potentials.
Yeah. And Mattison was one of them. And actually, I kind of dig Tevin Coleman. I think you and I are a little bit different on him. I just dig the role opportunity this year, and probably more so than the talent. But yeah, I mean, I think there's some really interesting opportunities. And like I saw Deion Lewis cut today, so I'm picking him up because, again, that's a one injury away running back who has shown it, right? I mean, that's a pretty interesting, again, with a lot of the things we're talking about. So I did hit that over there, and I've got another article. I got probably a couple articles coming out in the next week or so with regards to some more running back stuff and some more strategy talk.
Yep. Excellent. So starting next week, you're going to hear us talk about the FFPC startup draft that we're a part of in a couple days here. And do want to shout out for all the things at myffpc.com/footballguys. And again, the final thing is again, with that email, but also all the content at Football Guys. We're really gearing up for this push towards the season. We're seeing some of those, NFL team Zoom conferences are ending. A lot more quarterbacks and wide receiver combos are getting together, throwing passes, getting the reps. We still don't have, clarity on the preseason or what the schedule may be about training camp. But I think the good news for the NFL is we're going to get a lot of the tea leaves about maybe some of the roadblocks or hurdles that the NFL can make adjustments for that we're going to see through hockey, the NBA. We'll see about the Major League Baseball. But a lot of these other sports are going to be giving it a go relatively soon to kind of test the waters and see where we are, kind of a state of the union for being able to get back to play for the major sports. In the NFL, as we hope, it's going to be a normal and typical, to whatever degree that can be, this coming fall and winter. So in this episode, again, in addition to coffee talk, we also got to discuss Dalvin Cook, Alexander Mattison, a lot of running back talk, a lot of general dynasty team construction, also some trading there on the back end with some big time players. So for Chad Parsons and Jordan McNamara, and until next time, good luck in your dynasty leagues.